Hello, everybody, and welcome back to You Exchange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world, spanning across Europe, the USA, Africa, and India. This has allowed me to deliver actionable insights that have improved user experiences with nutrition, automotive, delivery, and e-commerce sectors. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research, specifically focusing on UX research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I will address a topic that is very dear to me because I have been asked several times by people in mentorship sessions as well as in messages that I get around this topic, which is the dreaded portfolio. So this is a topic that is dear to me because I have to tell you I was part of the group of people who thought, as a researcher, I don't and I shouldn't need to have a portfolio because I'm not a designer. I don't have any fancy design to showcase, and so I shouldn't need that. And let me tell you, I was wrong, to be honest, because I have also been on the other side of the coin, meaning as I was lead researcher and leading a team of 3 researchers, I also got to maybe not hire per se, but at least have a say in the hiring process. And so I took part in interviews and I had a strong say in who was going to be hired or not, depending. I can tell you a lot on the portfolio. Not only, of course, there was a strong contribution around how the person could share what they knew, could make us go through a process basically, even without the material per se being the portfolio. This was also important, of course. I'm not dismissing that. However, the portfolio is extremely, extremely important. And my view on that right now has radically changed. Right now, when I go on websites, if there are agencies, for instance, or freelance or other profiles, I'm very interested in knowing what people did. What do they have to showcase? That is a mark of, let's say, of quality, dedication, and of value, basically, that you can bring to a business. However, I also agree that there is this difficult challenge when it comes to experience. If you're very junior and you don't have an experience yet in the field, it might be difficult to build projects that would have an impact. And I'll get to that at the end of this episode. So this episode is going to be dedicated to the portfolio, how you should make a portfolio, why you should make one. I will make some examples that revolve around research. Nevertheless, you can also apply that to UX design and see how does that apply to other professions. But in my opinion, and long story short, I would say portfolios are important in almost any knowledge, work, and discipline. Even if it's not asked per se when you're going through the interview process, this is extremely important. If you're a developer, I remember back in the days when I learned some coding with one dear friend of mine, I remember being told, like, if you want to apply to some position, you need to know, you need to showcase what you coded, for instance. If you're a designer, of course, that's expected to have some visuals. But again, it's not entirely and only related to visuals. You need to showcase the process and how you came up with the design that you came up with and why and what was the impact. Your design is only the step in the middle, basically. And so, as a, let's say, a hiring person at some point in my career, if I had seen only artifacts, it wouldn't have been enough. I need to know what was the process, what is the thinking process. And to be honest, as soon as I was on the other side, I discovered the importance of it. I mean, this reinforced in my mind the importance of the portfolio. So hopefully in today's episode, I can help you in some ways to get less scared when it comes to the portfolio by giving you some tips and by helping you deconstruct a bit this large problem. So to start, I would say the first recommendation I could give you is please do not do like me. Meaning, the first recommendation I can give you is to, if you are already a professional working and you already have some examples of work and that you produce some artifacts and some deliverables, please do not wait until the moment you want to change careers. Do not wait until the moment you're laid off. Do not wait until the last minute to create your portfolio for several reasons. So, of course, I do not want to get into the topic of privacy and confidentiality. This, you have to manage it by yourself. In my opinion, we shouldn't showcase work that is confidential. In general, companies allow it after 5 years. And even though, I think it's good practice to showcase more or less a process, not necessarily the whole strategy, not necessarily results, and so on and so forth. And if more details are necessary, you can ask your current boss, your current company, how do they see that? If it's okay to share it during the interview only, if it's okay to share it behind a password, and so on and so forth. If it's okay to share it only physically inside the company, and so on and so forth. So you have various strategies, and I will get around some strategies you can have once at the end of the podcast, at the end of the episode, if you don't have any work to showcase so far, first of all, and if you are deeply tied to, let's say, confidentiality matters. I have been there and I found some ways to get around that and to still be able to be hired. Even, for instance, not showing any confidential work. It works. It's possible. So, but first advice, please get into the habit of documenting what you do step by step. Once you're already working, for instance, again, everything you're able to share, everything you're able to store, but get into this habit of documenting. It doesn't need to be necessarily storing the work and the artifacts and so on, even though it's oftentimes appreciated. You can anonymize data and so on. Again, I will come to that at the end of the episode. But it can be simply reflecting on your past project and activity. What have you done? What have you accomplished? What is the outcome? And having this habit and getting into this mindset every time of trying to reflect on what you did and what are the implications for the future will also help you to be a better professional. Be it at UX design, at UX research, and so on, project management, a people management, coding, and so on and so forth. It will help you become a better professional. So it's just about reflecting what went wrong, what could you do better, and also knowing all the categories and all the sections that you should address in your portfolio in general, relevant to your profession will help you structure your ideas and every time think in terms of these components. For instance, if you know that the case study section should have a limitations section, well, every time you in your company have to present some work, you will think about the limitations section to avoid skipping that information when you present. So that also retroactively feeds your work in your everyday work. So in short, really don't do as me. I knew that, and I tend to think about this every time to document my work. But even though we all know the friction this takes, and it's also a habit that we usually do not take, but when it comes to the moment of crafting your portfolio, it's difficult. So don't do this way. Really document your work and update your portfolio on the go. One piece of advice I can give you is try as much as possible to create a template. And here I can provide templates. Reach out to me if you want some templates. I will think about that, probably give you some templates at the end of all this series of episodes. But really bear in mind that this template is really good if you come up with it yourself. So I came up with mine, but it was through a process of getting to understand what is being asked in interviews, what should I provide, what am I comfortable sharing, and so on and so forth. It also depends a lot on the case study. So come up with your template. It will be better for you to integrate what are all the parts that usually are necessary. But nevertheless, it's also good to have some examples and templates for you to get help on how to craft your portfolio. So this is something I will think about. But yes, that is a good tip that you should have in mind, is to create a template. And also, so then I wanted to communicate with you some lists, some tips that you should have in mind before you craft a portfolio. So first of all, you should, of course, understand your audience. If you apply at a tech company, it's of course not the same thing as if you apply to a nutrition company, a food company, a public sector company, and so on and so forth. So understand your audience, understand what they are doing, what are their products, what are their expectations, so that you can, of course, adjust your presentation. Curate all your projects. So it's good. In general, you will have a list of projects. If you're working for some time, curate them. My best piece of advice is really to have a list, a master portfolio, the same way I said in other episodes when I mentioned that it's good to have a master resume, because it helps you. It's way easier to copy content from one place to another and to filter than to come up with new content every time. So if you have a master portfolio somewhere, it will help you tremendously and it will save you time. Then, of course, think about the documents you want to present. Again, these are questions you should ask yourself. Have I the right to share this document? Do I have the document to start with? So think about that and filter the document you will be able to share. And also, when I say right document, it's also about what are the documents that really support my idea as much as possible. Describe all your context and the teams you work with. So for each project, you should have a context for this project. What was the ask? What were you asked? What was the problem? What was it addressed this way? Who were you working with? What were your main role in this team? Because even if you worked with a UX designer and you were the UX researcher, probably it doesn't mean you were the one doing the research. Probably you were the one supporting the UX designer do his or her own research. So make it clear what was your role. And to be honest, this is one of the categories and the sections that I oftentimes forget when I make my portfolio, when I update it, and when I present it. But as a hiring, let's say at some point manager, I could really tell you it's really important that this would be mentioned. And I can tell you, in some interviews, I had people telling me, oh yes, we, and it's good. Actually, this is encouraged to speak in the we format because it shows some humble attitude and that it was a team effort and so on and so forth. Yes, I'm not saying not to do it, because oftentimes UX design and product design is about team collaboration. However, it's really good to have a section in which you say what were you responsible about. So if you did market research, probably you were in charge of crafting a survey. Only that, probably. Probably you were the one in charge of crafting the problem statement from your market research. So make that clear. What were your responsibilities? Also, when I say curate your projects, you will have to curate them based on what the company is looking for, of course, on what the team is looking for. Also, if you know about the hiring manager, their sensitivity, and so on, it will be easier for you if you know what they're looking for. But also, you want to be able to showcase a broad range of skills and experience. So imagine you're looking for a job of senior UX researcher, for instance, or principal UX designer, or lead UX researcher. It will not be the same kind of portfolio you will show. For a lead UX researcher, for instance, you will show initiatives for you to improve the craft of research, evangelization across the company, collaboration with stakeholders, and so on and so forth. If you're an intermediate UX researcher and you're applying for a senior UX researcher position, you want to showcase the fact that you master a lot of research methodologies. So, for instance, it can be showcase one project in which you did survey, but also qualitative analysis, one project in which you did car sorting and tree testing, so that overall, across all projects, we have an idea as hiring managers that you are a well-rounded UX researcher with several methodologies in mind and in your arsenal. I mean, try to communicate clearly as much as possible. Remember one thing: if there is one thing you can be assured of, except if you're applying to an internal position, one thing you can be assured of is that the people you're talking to, and except if they are direct competitors, which is not so frequent, it happens when it's not so frequent. So except in these cases, I would say your hiring managers and HR people and so on do not know what you did. They don't know the lingo and they don't know what's that about. You need to talk to them in a way that is really, really understandable. I'm not saying to talk to them as if they were dumb, but really try to make that as accessible as possible. And so for that, I would say the trick here is to read your content and try to decrease the, let's say, the level of your English in this case, or the language, to a lower reading level. So there are reading levels, you can check that online, and there are also tools to help you check if the way you're expressing yourself is at a certain reading level. So imagine I want to express myself for a 9th grade, for instance. So to be honest, it sounds weird to express your findings, your portfolio, your projects, imagine to a 9th grade. But for me, when I discover a new topic and I want to learn about something, the best books and the best educational programs and the like are the ones that are written for, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but something like 9th grade. It's like you're like 11 years old. Something like this. I might be wrong, but you get the idea. It's like you're really young. And so for me, when I discover about something, at least the first steps for me to understand a topic, I really need something to explain to me, like if I was 10 years old. And so then gradually I will understand more the topic. But if you're expressing your case study to someone that is outside of this study, it's better to start from here. And then gradually, probably they will ask questions, of course, and probably you can deep dive into the topic. But that's the idea. Of course, you should be able to summarize important findings. So again, I told you in a separate episode that some people are able to share their PhD thesis in 3 minutes. So you should be able to share any kind of project-related work that is rarely more than 3 years, rarely, in that amount of time. So that's the reference. And to be honest, I'm working on this. I'm working on storytelling principles, templates, and so on to be really efficient at showcasing my work in like 5 minutes. And then if people want to have more in-depth insights, let's say, I will deep dive and I will have appendices and I will have more content to share. Of course, you should also demonstrate value. So it's really important to showcase not only work, but how this work had an impact. So it can be an impact in the industry. It can be an impact on people, on users. It can be an impact on revenue. It can be an impact on a lot of things. And here, a small mention for people who are very junior, go straight out of college, or already working but cannot showcase any work. So here I want to address this topic now, even though it's not exactly the section, but I might forget it in the future. So how do you demonstrate work and impact if you didn't have the time to make projects on your own, or if you're not allowed to showcase your work because it's confidential, or you're very junior? So let's take several examples. If you work at a company in which the work is really confidential, I would advise you to go through several levels. The first level is to speak to your manager, of course, to see if you have agreement to share any kind of work whatsoever. And oftentimes they will tell you what you're able or not able to share. They know you need to make a portfolio. They know. We all know that. And so you have to have this conversation. That's the first step. Then I would advise you to go from showing everything, if you're allowed to. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you're allowed to. If you work on something that will become public soon and then it becomes public, and the company is really open on what they're doing, sometimes it happens. So maybe you can go from one extreme, which is sharing everything, to another extreme, which is showing nothing. And in between, what do you have? Well, you have techniques to share your work without sharing too much of it. So for instance, we can do what we call anonymized data. So if you have some data, you can change the numbers, basically, so that we don't know exactly what were the real numbers, for instance. You can share a subset of it. Imagine you tackle 3 objectives. You can share only one of them, which is like okay to share if it's not too confidential. You can also blur some graphs. So by blurring, we see more or less the shape of it and we still see the process. So you can say, for instance, oh, I did card sorting here. But then you don't need to show the matrix of your results of card sort. We know how this is. You just need to say, I analyzed the matrix of similarity and dissimilarity. That's it. Or you can say, I did a market research, a survey, and then you can say, I did correlational analysis. I correlated one variable to the other, one demographic variable with one attitudinal variable, and that's it. And then you can tell them, I'm sorry, but you understand that I'm limited to sharing some only topics that are not confidential, and so on and so forth. So these are some tips for people who work with, work that is highly confidential. for instance. Then you can be really junior. So here I will have several tips, and not all of them might be pleasant to hear. Sorry, but this is the hard truth. If you're really, really junior, the first thing I could advise is do some project on your own. I know it's not a good thing to hear because oftentimes we don't have the time, but really, really go through this, and it will also help you to gain some experience. I would try to go through a passion project, and it doesn't need to be long. And I know that it's difficult to gain the motivation, but to be honest, myself included, there are a lot of UX researchers and UX designers and product managers who have a lot of experience and are looking for junior UX researchers to mentor and to run some projects for them. You can also try to find people who would hire UX researchers, designers, programmers to do some work for free in exchange for recognition, in exchange for let's say stakes in the company if something goes well. This is something you don't want to, let's say, to dismiss. This is a good opportunity for you, especially at the start of a career. So I would try that, to be honest, and it doesn't need to be long. That's one thing. Then about the motivation part, it's true that if you work for yourself and it's like, if your goal is really just to showcase something in a portfolio, it will not be motivating. I don't know for you, but at least for me, it was not motivating. So what you can do is go through mentorship. And I really don't want to emphasize on that again, but I will say it just in case. I provide also mentorship sessions, and if you don't know where to look for, you don't have to go through me, but there are a lot of awesome mentors around the world. You have adplist.org, which provides which lists mentors for free that can help you and guide you along the way to craft a portfolio and a case study. And to be honest, the portfolios and case studies are few when it comes to the topics mentees reach out for in mentorship sessions. So we are really, really happy when people come with work, when people actually come with some passion projects that they want to go through it, or that they come with a portfolio and they want feedback. We are really happy. Oftentimes they come with resume, or I don't manage to have my first interview, which is okay. We also love to provide support for that. But to be honest, what will really, really help you and make the difference is the work you provide and the value you're able to showcase. And so that would be my first piece of advice, is really go through a passion project all by yourself. And then to relate to this aspect of the impact, because if you're a junior UX researcher and you do a passion project of yours, you might not be able to showcase impact because you're not working for a company that can leverage your research. This is really important to recognize. UX researchers or designers or coders that are juniors, it's true, it's really difficult to showcase impact, because the impact you might have in general, we need a structure and we need a company to leverage those insights with other people such as coders, product managers, and the like, to be able to act on these insights. You cannot do all of that all by yourself. So it's totally understandable that you do not have impact if you are on a project all by yourself. This is totally understandable. My piece of advice, if I would be hiring a junior UX researcher, for instance, or designer, marketer, whatever, a developer, I will look for what they did and how do they think it could be impactful. How would they apply it, basically? What would be their next step? Basically, imagine I do a passion project for the city when it comes to the bicycle sharing service. I see that the application is really terrible, and so these are my insights to improve on it. basically my next step, what could they be? Well, probably to reach out to the company and try to see if they would act on the insights. It doesn't need to be done, but just giving some next steps, or maybe even a step back, just saying what you would do as recommendations, basically, and what could the impact be. So imagine I have a project of mine, I have an app currently going on. When this app will be out in the market and it's used by users, if at some point one user reaches out to me and says, I did some UX research on your app and these are the recommendations, and if you apply those, you could expect, I don't know, XYZ increase in retention or whatever. This would blow my mind, to be honest, and this person would be hired right away. I'm speaking for myself, but this is at least what I would do if I would be doing a passion project and giving some, let's say hints into what would be my next steps. So that's it for the section about demonstrating value, even if you don't have currently experience. What is really important also is to acknowledge the constraints. So really mention the limitations. What you could have done better if it was ideal conditions. For instance, we did not interview enough users. We had only 5 customers. And let me tell you, this happens a lot. We always say 8 people are the minimum, but this happens a lot, and that can be an example of limitation. Or we know we gave these cards in a card sort and the labels are not optimal because it can be biased. No worries, just say that. Because if you say it, it shows that you think about a lot of things. It shows that you know your stuff, basically. Or even if you don't know it, that you took the time to consider the idea. It's way better than to come up with insights or results and not sharing the limitations, to be honest. So, and also because the limitations, if you share them, this facilitates the work from the team to think about the next steps and what could be improved, basically. And then basically iterate on the work, basically. Show what you could do better in the future and what would you improve, basically, for next time. And then when it comes to what you should include inside of the portfolio, I would say, well, first of all, if we speak about the UX research, for instance, as an example, but then I will delineate the example for other professions. Of course, you should list the types of research you have done, the types of skills, what you're comfortable with. It can be tools, it can be skills. I would put more emphasis on the skills than the tools, because the tools you can still learn a new tool, but to be honest, the reality is different. We have some companies asking for, do you know how to use Python? Yes, okay. Well, it's different, it's a language, I know, but you get the idea. I have been told in interviews, do you know how to use user testing? Well, I used user Zoom. It's really similar. It's not user testing. Oh yeah, okay. Well, it's to be honest, for me, it's not a problem. If a user researcher comes out to me and says, well, I know how to use Maze, I don't know how to use user testing, that's okay. You will learn user testing. If you know how to do research, that's what I want, to be honest. So I would put more emphasis on the skills, the types of research you have done, how you approach problems. To be honest, the more I progress in my career, the more I see the skills that really matter is like the processes you take. Because we are not being evaluated like in university or in school. You're not being evaluated on if you know XYZ theory. Yes, it's good, but you're evaluated on your ability to follow a process and to be let's say, to think in retrospect if you do things correctly, if you can improve, and so on and so forth. Then in terms of the content of the portfolio, it's also good to have in general 3 to 5 projects. This is usually a rule of thumb when it comes to UX research, but I'm sure it will apply to development, to design, and so on, because it's usually the time it takes to share. It's usually the number of projects that you will have the time to share in an interview session. Then, for instance, when it comes to research, specifically the artifacts you could share would be the study plan, how you did your study, if you did some usability tests, for instance, some tasks, early concepts, sketches, wireframes. When you did some research, you could also include the quotes, so short quotes from usability tests or user interviews. If you did market research, it could be some graphs, it can be some percentages from surveys. And then that's like the raw data. It's good to have the raw data to, well, at least a sneak peek of the raw data. How did it look like? What were your process to analyze, basically, to go step by step in the process to analyze. But then, of course, think also about the synthesis part. So, for instance, I really love to see some affinity diagrams, some storyboards, some customer journey. Think about all that. This shows a process and an ability for you to come up with abstraction, let's say, to go higher in the complexity of your conclusions, basically. And then, and I will cover that in the next episode, it's all about articulation. You should articulate all of these elements inside a coherent story. So think about, for instance, when it applies to research, you should cover, for instance, well, the context of the research. Why did you start this project? And this could apply to project management as well. What did this project start in any area, to be honest? When we do something, we need to know why. Why did it start? What was the problem? What was the tension, basically? And then you have the goals. What were the goal of the project? Again, this is particularly important for research, but not only. If you do some UX design, you should know what you're designing for. What was the duration? What were the users you studied, or let's say the audience? And then the findings. Also think about the methodology. What was your process, basically? So I'm not a designer, but I know more or less the steps that it takes to design. And if I needed to interview at some point a designer, I would like to see, okay, what was your ideation process? Did you run some workshops? How did you prioritize your ideas? How did you come up with, let's say, the first wireframes? How did you come up with the prototypes? What were the collaboration process? What were all the steps you came up with, basically? How did you collaborate on the projects? That is also super important. What was your main role, and how did you collaborate with others? What were the dynamics of the team, and so on and so forth. And then my last part would be when it comes to the projects you want to showcase. Again, this is important to showcase a broad range of skills and something that is in line with what the hiring manager is looking for, what is in line with the job offer. So you can have a sneak peek of what they're looking for by looking at the job offer. You look at that and you see, okay, we're looking for someone who is highly, let's say, trained in quantitative skills. Okay, so maybe you would have a ratio of 2 to 1 in your portfolio projects in favor of quant studies, for instance. So there is that. Showcase a broad range of skills, of course, and also try to prioritize on other criteria. We could think about prioritizing in terms of impact. For instance, you did something that brought the company 9 million, imagine, or increased in, let's say, by 10% in retention scores. So that would be more impactful than, let's say, the impact could be we implemented 3 recommendations, So that's something I really want to emphasize. The impact need not be in terms of business. That should be really, really clear. The impact can be a lot of things, and it need not be quantifiable. It can be any kind of impact. And for me, when I'm hiring, of course, this is from my perspective, then of course it will depend on the company. There are companies who want to hire the best talent and they will be highly, highly selective. Of course, this exists, and they will select people based on their previous impacts, naturally. So, but overall, for me, I would say the most important is first to have a sneak peek at the impact per se. Just this information should be mentioned. And then, of course, applicants will be ranked depending on their impact. But the impact can be an increase in revenue, so business metrics. It can be an increase in number of customers. It can be a lot of things, but it can also be adoption of your new policy. The company adopted a new policy because of you, or improvement of a process in terms of research and collaboration. It can also be qualitative. A majority of users said that this interface was easier to use. So that would be the prioritization in terms of impact. Then you can also prioritize in terms of methodology. So you can prioritize for quantitative studies, as I said before. And finally, you can prioritize for recency. It's always a good rule of thumb to feature projects that were completed in the past few years. And by few, I would say 2 years max. If you don't have more than that, if you have only a few, well, you can showcase more, of course. But try to have a balance, basically. Also, try to prioritize depending on if the project was large or the project was small. And try to have a balance around that as well. That would be it for today's episode. I hope you learned at least one thing. I hope I helped to see it a bit more clearly when it comes to what should be inside of the portfolio, how you can address this dreaded challenge. As far as I'm concerned, I will get to it. Right now, I will update my portfolio, and so I will share more content as I'm updating this. So the next parts might be a little bit more about specifically the content, talking about my view about a template, how you can present that during interviews, and so on and so forth. But until then, if you like this episode and you think it might be useful to some other people, please share it with your friends, with your colleagues. Feel free to comment, to subscribe. And until then, take care. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on New Exchange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it, and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.